My fiancé secretly invited my abusive twin sister to our wedding. So, I canceled wedding and left her behind. I'm a 28-year-old man, and just a few months ago, I was thrilled to be engaged to my girlfriend Jane of 3 years. She's 26, and before the engagement, I thought I knew her well, a laid-back, kind, and understanding person. But as soon as the engagement ring went on her finger, everything changed. Jane became controlling and dismissive of my opinions, especially when it came to planning the wedding. Initially, I chalked it up to excitement and stress. I let her take the reins, even when she made decisions that frustrated me, like inviting distant acquaintances and old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. I told her it would be awkward, but Jane insisted that everyone who ever knew me should be there. I let it go, hoping this overbearing side of her would fade after the wedding. One issue, however, I couldn't overlook. Jane kept bringing up my twin sister, Belle, despite knowing I hadn't spoken to her in a decade. I went no contact with my twin 10 years ago after an incident that left me physically and emotionally scarred. Jane knew I didn't want my sister at the wedding, and I made it clear that the topic was not up for discussion. Eventually, I had to snap and tell her that if she brought up my sister again, I'd call off the wedding. That seemed to end the argument for a while. To understand my reaction, you need to know about my history with my twin. Growing up, we didn't have the kind of sibling relationship most people imagine. Behind the smiling childhood photos, we harbored a deep-seated rivalry. We didn't just compete, we outright hated each other. Things escalated in high school when I scored higher than her on our SOTS exams. Belle didn't speak to me for days, and I reveled in what I thought was my victory. The real breaking point came during college admissions. Belle's dream was Princeton, while mine was Yale. At first, I didn't even apply to Princeton to avoid being anywhere near her. But after some convincing from friends, I submitted a last-minute application. She didn't know, and I didn't tell her. Why stir the pot? When acceptance letters arrived, I was thrilled to be accepted to both Yale and Princeton. Belle, however, didn't get into Princeton, only Columbia. My parents, trying to celebrate both our achievements, threw a surprise party with our college names on the cakes. The moment she saw Princeton on mine, she exploded, accusing me of stealing her dream. That evening, I tried to make peace. I followed her outside to talk, but instead, Belle ambushed me. She hit me over the head with a shovel and stomped on my wrist. I woke up in the hospital with a head injury and a dislocated wrist. My parents begged me not to press charges, and though I reluctantly agreed, I cut her off completely. Belle was sent away, and I never asked where. I focused on moving forward, dealing with the migraines and emotional scars left behind. It's been 10 years since, and I've moved on with my life now. My parents and I never talk about my sister, and neither does anyone else from my family. I'm sure they've all still kept in touch with her, but have the good sense to never bring her up when they're around me. So when Jane asked about her, I told her that we weren't inviting her and assumed that that would be the end of the discussion. I never told her exactly what had happened, but I don't think I should have to be very honest. Just the fact that we haven't spoken in over 10 years should be reason enough for her to understand that I absolutely don't want my sister around. Not now, and not ever again. Jane should have respected that, but she started hounding me and didn't stop for days until I snapped at her and told her that if she brought my sister up again, then I'd call off the whole wedding. That seemed to shut her up for a while, but then, 2 days back on the day of our wedding, I realized what she'd done behind my back. On the day of our wedding, as I stood at the altar waiting for her to walk down the aisle, I noticed a face among the bridesmaids that was so familiar. Belle, my twin sister. She looked as confused as I felt. Jane finally walked down the aisle, looking really happy and smiling widely, but I didn't feel anything apart from anger and betrayal. I knew this was her doing and couldn't believe her audacity. I didn't waste a second and asked her why Belle was there when I categorically told her not to invite her under any circumstances. She told me that she didn't want to have that discussion and wanted to get married first, but obviously, that was not going to happen. Not anymore. So I told her that we needed to talk about this right now, and Jane admitted that she'd told my parents that I'd been talking about wanting to reconcile with Belle before getting married, which is how she'd persuade them to give her my sister's address and contact info. We were up there, arguing back and forth for like 5 minutes while our guests waited, and finally, I realized that there was just no point in fighting for our relationship anymore. That's done. I didn't want anything to do with this woman, so I just walked out of the wedding. I could hear her calling for me to come back, but I didn't pay any heed to it and continued walking until I reached my car. Then I started driving and kept driving until sunset and decided to sleep in my car itself. I canceled everything on the phone in the evening and ignored all the calls and messages from Jane and family on purpose. Thankfully, I had enough gas to go back home the next day, but as soon as I saw Jane's car in the driveway, I decided to live at a hotel instead. It's been 2 days, and I haven't responded to any of my fiancé's calls or texts. My parents have also been trying to get through to me, but I can't bother with them right now, honestly. I can't even believe they were stupid enough to think that I'd suggest reconciling with my sister ever and fell for Jane's lie. The least they could have done was call me up to confirm if this is what I wanted, but they chose to believe that this is the kind of surprise I would have wanted at my wedding. Most of all, I'm beyond pissed off at Jane because of what she did. She had absolutely no right to go behind my back, manipulate my parents, and then bring my sister, whom I didn't want to meet once again in my life, to our wedding. She created a royal mess of things, none of which would have happened if she just respected what I'd said. A few hours ago, Jane sent me a really long text about how she'd only found out what had really happened all those years ago from my parents yesterday after I walked out of the wedding. She apologized for blindsiding me and agreed that she should have listened to me when I said I didn't want my sister at our wedding. She also mentioned that my parents and friends were livid that she'd done something of this sort, and she'd received an earful from all of them. But she also added that she thought that I should have mentioned the specifics of my great fallout with my sister, and should have mentioned the exact reason why I didn't speak to her anymore, so that she wouldn't have invited her. I don't agree with that in the least. Yeah, maybe that would have helped, but I shouldn't have to spell out everything for her. It was a painful memory for me, and I don't like talking about it. Besides, Jane should have just believed me when I told her that I didn't want my sister anywhere near me. Nobody just cuts off their sister for 10 years without a valid reason, and she should have known that. I'm not getting married to her anymore. That's for sure, but I don't know if I owe her an apology either. I don't feel particularly sorry about it. And if anything, Jane should be the one apologizing without blaming me. I'm planning on going back home in a few days, but I have to make sure that Jane isn't there when I get back. Obviously, she'll be the one moving out since the house is actually mine. I'll give her enough time to pack up and move out, which is more than what she deserves. It's been 3 days since Jane left, but she hasn't been able to accept the fact that we're over yet, and has been calling me every single day. I'm not answering any of them, but I do feel a little sorry for her. As for my parents, they dropped by yesterday and apologized profusely for whatever happened and took all the blame upon themselves. I also finally asked them what Belle had been up to all these years, and they told me that after that incident, they sent her away to an anger issues rehabilitation center where she spent several months undergoing treatment and intensive therapy since her mental issues were clearly a lot more severe than mine. Once Belle was cleared, she finally started college but had to rent an apartment where she lived by herself and my parents would visit her on the weekends. She seemed a lot more normal and stable after that, and even started working at around the same time as me. Over time, Belle'd been living a little out of town and ran her own business, which was nice, I guess. They also told me that after I walked out of the wedding, Belle seemed to sense that she'd caused this and left immediately after apologizing to our parents for showing up. Apparently, she'd been told by Jane that this was just a rehearsal and not the actual wedding, but it all seemed pretty real to her, which is why she looked so confused. My parents also handed me a letter that my sister had written to me, and after they left, I finally opened it up and read it. It's been an hour since then, and I'm still shattered by it. Belle apologized for every single thing that she'd put me through while we were kids, and then as teens, and promised me that she'd change now. Her words seemed full of regret about how we could have been the best of friends, but are just bitter strangers now, and said that while she didn't hold any hope to reconcile anytime soon because of her violent streak, she did wish that I'd forgive her someday, and that we'd have a real, genuine shot at being the kind of siblings that people would want us to be. I teared up reading that, and I guess I do want the same thing. I'll give myself some time to think about it, and maybe if I feel ready for it, I'll forgive her someday since I've been pretty cruel to her as a child too. For now, I'm focused on rebuilding my life and processing the whirlwind of betrayal and drama. The relationship with my ex-fiancé is over, and I'm looking forward to a future free of toxic ties. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them, so please leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this one.